What are your plans for the housing bill, Mr. President?
I don't know. I think it's so unimportant by compared to the Save America Act. Here's what I would like to say. Much more than a bill, that big deal. It's a yawn. Some people say it's wonderful. To me, compared to the Save America Act, just about everything is a big yawn.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York, and I'm Jackie Alamany in for Nicole Wallace. Despite his claims to the contrary, billionaire Donald Trump doesn't seem to care about the needs of the American people. Because when given the chance to make things better, like making homes more affordable, he chooses not to. What he described there as a big yawn was a bill that passed with bipartisan support, a rarity these days, that would help make the housing market more accessible to everyday Americans. Trump did not sign it, saying he wouldn't do so unless Republicans passed the SAVE Act, a controversial bill that gives the federal government more control over elections. That was 10 days ago, and Trump still has not signed the housing bill. Unless he actually vetoes it, the legislation will quietly go into effect tonight, even without his signature. Trump has been putting his fragile ego and pettiness over his 2020 election loss ahead of legislation that would actually help American lives. And it's remarkable because Trump could actually take credit for a legislative win here. And yet, he isn't. As opposed to when he took credit for something that isn't even his doing. Earlier this week, Trump said on social media that Walmart would be lowering prices, specifically beef prices, and that they were doing so at his administration's request. Yet reporting from our colleague Catherine Rampel in The Bulwark finds, in Walmart's case, a spokesperson that the retailer began one of its regular price rollback events earlier last week, i.e. the week before Trump blasted out his claim that price cuts were imminent and would be happening at his request. So, an out-of-touch Trump is where we begin this hour. Political analyst and host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, is here. Also with us, Media Matters for America, Angelo Carusone. And with me at the table, Democratic strategist and Columbia University professor, political analyst Basil Smikle, plus founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader, is here. She's here despite the traffic and despite just running down 43rd Street. So for that, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, World Cup.
What is your assessment of what is going on here? I think we've heard a lot of different takes that the president's primary impetus and motivation here is to hang on to the Republican Party and that his control over the party is ultimately more important to him than anything. But I feel like after we've seen his financial disclosure last week, crypto returns amounting to $3.8 billion, that there's something else going on here. What's your take on all of this?
Well, first of all, aside from the irony of him referencing yawning on virtually any topic, that seems like a bad call considering how often he's falling asleep in the middle of critical meetings. But look, it starts to feel like actually he really does mean it, that at this point he has so little filter left, that he doesn't care about the housing bill. And I think it's in part because he didn't do it. It was a Senate and a House that came together despite him to solve problems for the American people. And increasingly, it starts to look like if he didn't shape it, if he didn't call for it, if he didn't own it from beginning to end, which he feels that he did with the SAVE Act, that he wants nothing to do with it. And he doesn't seem to really care whether it affects the American people or not. And housing, of all things, this is the construction president. He's supposed to love this. But he's so focused on his own house, well, the one that is his house for now, his temporary home, and remodeling it, he doesn't seem to worry very much about the rest of America.
And Angelo, for all the conversations that you and I have had over the influence and the way that critics of Donald Trump are actually able to permeate and get through to his supporters when they disagree with what the president is doing. And that trickle-down effect, sometimes being quite slow. It seems like this issue is something that is actually resonating with voters, with 60% of voters disapproving of Trump's handling of the economy and 33% approving, his lowest rating ever on this question. Why is this resonating more than anything else?
You can't ignore it. You can't lie your way out of it. You can't tell, you can't do this sort of fake performance and hope people sort of pick up onto the story you're telling, because they're living the reality. It's impossible to disconnect the prices, and in particular gas prices, from from their day-to-day reality, and that's the big part of this. And it's worth noting two things: that one, they spent quite a lot of time under the Biden years explaining and socializing to their audience the connective relationship between gas prices and every other thing in their lives. I mean, they really built that connective tissue as a media ecosystem. It wasn't just Trump, it was the larger right-wing media apparatus that he relies on now. And so the audience is already baked into and to understand the relationship that gas is going to have an effect on my day-to-day life. The other thing to consider, and you can hear that playing out in the callers, I always like to listen to what the callers say, and they're calling in to complain about this. In talk radio and Megyn Kelly's show, across the board, it is clearly penetrating the audience. On the other hand, and this is the warning sign, a lot of the personalities, and that's the thing Trump is listening to, are saying, do the performance. Go after the Republican Party for not doing enough to push the SAVE Act. And I think that's the real tell here, because Trump has already decided that he can't get the voters. So he's going to orient the next couple months to getting the votes. And that means manipulating the election in one way, shape, or form. So at the end of the day, he doesn't really care about people because he's actually going after something quite different.
But Basil, is there a world in which if this president decided to act like a normal president and campaign on policies such as the housing bill that is going into effect tonight, and maybe some of the other wins, small wins, at least if you are talking to Democrats, but still wins nonetheless, that he has decided to skim over or at least cloud with his lack of message discipline, that the president wouldn't need to be forcing the SAVE Act down lawmakers' throats right now and wouldn't need to be finding these other ways to exert control over an election that he seems destined to lose right now.
Well, it's interesting because any other president, and in fact, any other speaker would do everything they needed to do to protect their members. That's what they do, right? They would create legislation, sign legislation. What's interesting is that legislatively, he's not doing that, but, they are having a midterm convention in Texas this year. And the reason that that's important is because it's less about policy and more about, I want the accolades, I want the adulation to try essentially and run again when he can't run again. But let me speak a little bit about the legislation itself.
Yeah.
Because there are two pieces to this. The SAVE Act is a really draconian act. But the fact that so many people feel that their votes might be disenfranchised, that they may be disenfranchised, that their vote might not count, is actually, in my view, pushing an overperformance of Democrats because they want to make sure that their votes count given what's coming out of D.C. On the flip side, the Housing Act is critically important because it gets rid of the private equity and invest in institutional investors in housing that are buying up large amounts of property. It's actually making, in many ways, housing more affordable, particularly in the suburbs that are 5-6 times now the cost, 5-6 times the cost of the median income. That's important because Democrats see this bill as an opportunity for affordable housing. Republicans see it as an opportunity for reduced regulation and construction. There's something for everybody, and he chose not to sign it.
Yeah, and also we should note that the latest attempt to jam the SAVE Act through at any sort of expense is the recent decision, the decision he made yesterday to fire the commissioners from the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission. But Tim, I didn't forget about you. Let's talk about Hakeem Jeffries' take on what's going on here. He posted on X, Republicans would rather make it harder to vote than easier to afford a home. When people show you who they are, believe them. Is this the right message from Democrats on this eve of the housing bill going into effect?
I think it's related to the right message. Not going to nitpick every tweet Hakeem Jeffries sends. I mean, there's some that hit a little harder than others. But I think it's important just to kind of keep the pressure on Trump. I think that the Democrats, for me, I think that the best message they have kind of is this umbrella message about what we were talking about at the beginning of the segment, which is Donald Trump like caring more about his house than theirs, and kind of tying corruption to the economic struggles that regular people are facing. And Donald Trump's made that very easy for them because he says over and over again that he's bored by the housing question, and he has. Obviously, I think it's obvious to anyone paying attention that his focus is on the remodeling of the White House and the Kennedy Center and the marble armrests, and like this is what he cares about. He doesn't care about making things better, more affordable for people. He calls that a hoax, the idea that affordability is an issue. So I just think if the Democrats can kind of have a two birds with one stone thing here, where they can go after him on his corruption, and also just talk about how that money that he's wasting and using in D.C. is like not going to help their lives. Like they're not getting a new, a new room in their school or a new room in their hospital. Trump's getting a new room at the White House. And I think that's the right message for them. The other funny thing about this for the Democrats, Jack, and you talked a lot of, in your reporting, the Republicans, my old people, the more mainstream kind of the old guard Republicans. And oftentimes over the years, they've said, hey, we can't buck Trump on this stuff. We can't vote against tariffs. We can't vote for Ukraine funding because Trump's too powerful. We don't want to lose our seat. Like it's a political imperative that you stick around with Trump because Trump's so powerful. I find it very funny and ironic that like by accident on this housing bill, they bucked Trump because they didn't know that he was going to have this temper tantrum over the SAVE Act. And look at what happened. This thing's going to go into effect at midnight because Trump's not going to veto it. There's a bipartisan veto-proof majority. All Trump's going to do is whine about it on social media. None of these Republicans are going to lose their jobs over it. Like we've spent 10 years being told that they can't have a backbone, they can't demonstrate any courage because they're worried that they'll lose their seat if they do. And here we see on the housing bill that actually this whole time they could have. Like Trump's not as strong as they think.
Well, back to this idea that you just more eloquently said, Tim, of the president caring about his house than really anything else right here. You brought up him. You made a very good point about him nitpicking at other costs. And that is the message that I am hearing from my Democratic sources, right? That this is an administration, this is a party that now haggles over $8 billion for renewing food stamps, would rather have people go hungry, but continues to enable a president who has been able to circumvent Congress in order to spend not quite $8 billion on these renovations, but a pretty large figure on the vanity projects. Why is there such an acceptance of this kind of messaging and behavior?
Yeah. Well, it's not too different than how the Tea Party's been acting for a long time, right? I mean, the Tea Party, kind of rationale in Congress fighting, kind of that wing fighting, within the House Republican caucus was always trying to, kind of cut, relatively speaking, to the sizes of the budget, like small programs, in the name of, alleged fiscal responsibility, but not doing anything to stand up to, Donald Trump's, through 2 terms now, profligate spending and his tax cuts. And so, this is kind of a piece of how these Republicans have been acting for 10 years now. But a prime example of this is you look at what was that last shutdown fight over? I know it's kind of hard to remember because so much happens, but it was over the extension of the Obamacare subsidies. Mm-hmm. And that affects real people, the cost that people are paying, in their premiums. And the Republicans and Donald Trump did not want to give people relief on their health care premiums and extend these subsidies. And the line item on that was nothing compared to how much we're spending on the Iran war, compared to what we're spending on a lot of other Donald Trump's other more selfish and corrupt priorities. And so I think that they're giving Democrats a big, kind of political opportunity with that contrast if they can take it.
Most Americans are not on Twitter. They're not reading what Hakeem Jeffries has to say. And they may not be following.
And even if they are on Twitter, they might not be
reading it
anyways.
Oh, God. Sorry. Old habits die hard. What can I tell you? They're not on social media reading this kind of stuff. But you know what? They do know. And this is something that I think it goes so far beyond what anyone's messaging is. Yeah. They know that they have a billionaire in the White House who is living what seems like a very lavish lifestyle with a lot of people around him who are also billionaires living lavish lifestyles, whether that's at Mar-a-Lago or in Washington or anywhere else. And they can't pay for school for their kids. They can't afford a house. Their children are moving back home with them. Groceries are expensive. Gas is through the roof. You don't even need a message to get that through to Americans. It's so glaringly obvious. And, obviously the Democrats have to make sure they don't, steal defeat from the jaws of victory on this one. But it's so visceral. And I think people are really starting to feel that just gross contrast.
Probably, if you're of a certain vintage, you would remember the show Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous.
Totally.
That was weekly. And I feel like this administration, we're watching it every single day with the President of the United States, champagne wishes and caviar dreams. And that, to your point, and to Tim's point, it really does show in the face of the American voter right now who are experiencing, and these are numbers that we don't talk enough about, year over year, double-digit increases in bankruptcies and foreclosures. Like there's real pain there in the credit card debt. I mean, there's real concern about affordability of everything right now.
And by the way, the Senate tried to pass a bill even just to cap credit card interest rates at like 15%. And Trump pushed the Republicans not to support it. We've got Americans paying like 30% interest from predatory lenders. So it's coming from every direction and there's no relief. And this was one chance for like a little bit of relief and we can't get it done.
We are going to take a quick break because we do need to talk about the fact that even if the president wanted to get out of this pickle, he might not be able to because of the Iran war. But we're going to get to the panel on Donald Trump's inability or unwillingness to do much or anything to help struggling Americans. And we're back with Tim, Angelo, Basil, and Lauren. Angelo, I want to get back to a point you made, which is that essentially gas signs are serving as an in-kind contribution for the Democratic Party right now. And you had Trump and his rapid response team make a bit of a snafu this week when the account decided to share a video segment from NBC Philadelphia. This is according to reporting from the Daily Beast that discussed how one former Carco K-Shop gas station, now wrapped in Freedom Fuel signage, posted a price of $3.47 per gallon. However, Google Street View images of the gas station showed that the promotion was not quite as monumental as the White House portrayed. In April of 2025, 3 months into Trump's second term, the gas station displayed a price of only $3.05 per gallon. Those images appeared to serve as a stark reminder that the price decrease touted by the White House was still effectively an increase over the prices seen before the war. It seemed like this White House was banking on the fact that voters would abide by their talking points, that going into this war was the best case scenario for the American people because for national security reasons, at least this is what they claimed. But it seems like now that voters, including Trump supporters, are paying these astronomical gas prices that have remained pretty high, despite some of these ups and downs and games that the president has been playing with the stock market and various MOUs and announcements being signed and then suddenly collapsing, that they are now seeing through the game that the White House is playing. Is there a world in which you feel like the administration can actually turn things around, or is this more than a rhetorical issue at this point?
So they probably can't because they're running out of tricks. And we don't want to get into the logistics here of like the strategic oil petroleum reserve, but it's not barrels of oil. It's just a giant salt mine. You can only take so much out of it before the thing collapses. And it's at its lowest level since 1983. There's not many more millions of barrels they can release before the strategic reserve collapses. That's just a geological fact. So one, their magic bag of tricks is gone. So even if they were committed to getting the prices down, their most immediate mechanism for doing that has a very, very short runway in front of them. So put that to the side and let's put that sort of out of the picture because it's not entirely necessary here. It gets to the Freedom Fuel piece because then they sort of do this fake performative theater hoping that the rest of the right-wing media echo chamber will latch onto that and that will then stick in their people's heads. And they have good reason to believe that will work because if you go back and look at what right-wing media was saying, Fox News, all the parts of the ecosystem that was supporting Trump, they were owning the fact that gas would go up. They was like, yeah, gas might go up a little bit, at the beginning of the Iran war. Yeah, sure. But then it's going to go back even lower. It's going to be the lowest it's ever been. So you're going to end up saving money over time. They were telling that to their audiences every month that it's about to drop for 2 weeks. Now we're at the edge of that. They can't continue to give people that long con. So one, they can't practically, there's no policy way for them to do it. And then the alternative is to create this sort of fantasy that their people can buy into that will at least serve as a salve over the immediate wound. That's what they've been relying on for the past few months, is the prospect that it's going to go down enough that people will think they're going to somehow cash out in the end or make out better. They're at the edge. They can't. So even if they were committed to doing it, there's no way. They can't lie about it. They can't create an alternative reality, and they can't do it from a policy perspective because of the status of what the reserve is. And obviously, they're not going to end the Iran war. I mean, we know that. So that's where the current landscape is. So that I think reinforces what we were talking about earlier, is that it's do or die for them from their perspective, that it's all in on the types of election interference and malfeasance, because they're not playing by the normal political rules. And we shouldn't lose sight of that fact either.
Yeah. And just to remind our viewers, this soundbite is now over a month old. Here is what the president actually thinks about the finances of Americans. Let's listen to it quickly.
When you're negotiating with Iran, Mr. President, to what extent are Americans' financial situations motivating you to make a deal?
Not even a little bit. The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. You cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all. That's the only thing that motivates.
Basil, is there a world in which you think Trump would ever admit that getting into the Iran war was a horrible decision?
Is there a world where, I mean, Earth 2017, I don't know, but no, I don't think that there's a world where he would do that. And, you know, to pull on Angelo's point a bit, because it's an important one, that they are so invested in the performative aspects of what's happening right now.
Right.
And there are voters that will continue to support him and pay those high prices because they think ultimately that's the sacrifice they need to undertake to be able to support him. I call it sort of political tithing, right? That's what they have to pay to make sure that he's whole as president. But that impact it seems to be affecting a smaller and smaller group of people. In other words, that there are more and more Americans that are saying there's no benefit to me to continue to do this, to continue to support. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to vote for Democrats right away, that they still have to, a lot of voters still have to be convinced to do that. Mm-hmm. But I do feel that there is an opening, because Trump can't, you know, he's going to continue to do this for as long as he's president. It's going to impact fewer and fewer people in a positive way. And even those that it does impact negatively, there are going to be fewer and fewer people that will stay behind him. But he'll never admit to anything, because, you know, to your point earlier about the bill, if it's not coming from him, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. If he doesn't author it, if he doesn't own it, he doesn't care anything about it. And therefore, why invest in it?
And I want to quickly do a hard pivot to a story that we haven't had the opportunity to talk about yet, which is Air Force One, the gift that was presented to the president by Qatar, which I feel like is pretty emblematic of so many things that we have seen with this administration. A very dubious decision and done in a very expedited way that obviously comes up short, the way so many other of his vanity projects and policies have ended. Tim, why do you think that the president decided not to fly back on the new Air Force One? Do you buy that the White House's pushback, that it was because they wanted soldiers in Europe to be able to view this gift from Qatar? Or do you believe the New York Times reporting that the new Air Force One lacks the same defensive countermeasures that were security features of the old model, including its advanced anti-missile capabilities? This is according to multiple officials who have been briefed on how the jet was retrofitted, and that Mr. Trump had pushed for the new plane to be put into use as quickly as possible, and complained that the old presidential aircraft was not impressive enough to take on international trips.
Yeah, there's a lot here, Jackie, because it does kind of wrap up a lot of the themes of Trump. He's obviously lying. I mean, like that. I mean, it's insulting lie, frankly, because he was bragging about how much he wanted to, how he liked flying on that jet because it was more luxurious or whatever. Like the idea that he would not want to ride it back because he wanted to show it off to, like, it just doesn't even make any sense. Obviously, I trust the experts, the people who are reporting on this, that it just was not safe, that they didn't deem it safe to fly out of Ankara, in part because it's so close to Iran, because he started a stupid war in Iran. So, I mean, this does tie exactly to that. And the other thing about this plane, sometimes I like to put my former Republican hat on and think about like how Fox would be covering this if this was a Democratic president, or how Republican politicians would talk about this. And I also just think it's extremely humiliating for Donald Trump. And we had to take a hand-me-down plane from Qatar, from the Sharia law dictators in Qatar. That's what we're doing. Like, that's where America is right now. And it's a pretty good encapsulation of American decline. And I think that sometimes maybe that is a more effective kind of message than talking about Trump, because everything else, all the details of his corruption get kind of complicated. But like the fact that we, the taxpayers, had to pay $500 billion to fund his hand-me-down plane is pretty embarrassing and humiliating, I think, for the country.
When we return, we're going to keep this conversation going. There are growing fears amongst Republicans in Congress that Donald Trump's renewed strikes on Iran could tank their chances in the midterms. One GOP operative warning that Trump is, quote, screwing us into political oblivion. Tell us how you really feel. Those fears and how Democrats can turn up the heat after a short break. With the Trump administration's ceasefire with Iran now in shambles, Republican lawmakers are sounding the alarm over the impact the war in Iran could have on their electoral chances this November. Politico has new reporting detailing how the party that promised America First policies has become vulnerable thanks to Donald Trump's betrayal of a campaign promise of no new wars. From that reporting, the latest resumption of fighting poses economic risks some GOP incumbents fear could cost them in November, including higher gas prices during the year's busiest travel season. And they worry, as the cycle of war and fragile peace plays out, that the president cares little about their political fate. From one Republican lawmaker, quote, midterms are still beyond Trump's focus zone. Not screwing us might be his goal, but he's screwing us into political oblivion. We are back with our panel. Lauren, I feel like that article could have been written last month, 2 months ago, maybe a few weeks after this war with Iran started. I mean, those quotes also sort of imply that Congress feels that they are powerless here, when in reality, aside from some of the recent spat of Supreme Court decisions that have been made, the Constitution bestows Congress more power than any other branch of government. Lawmakers could take some agency here and do something, no?
And they declined to do so when they had the opportunity, because they could have held him accountable and passed a law preventing him from continuing. The thing is, the arrogance, I mean, you have to go back to like the initial just absolute blind arrogance that got us into this in the first place. When you've had half a dozen presidents over the last, 60 years recognize that Iran is one of those places that just defies all the standard rules. And then you have Netanyahu who, barrels ahead manages to persuade Trump and Hegseth that somehow we're going to do what nobody else has been able to do. And what have they discovered? That in fact we cannot do what nobody else has been able to do, for very good reason, because, just as the arrogance, kept us in Vietnam for a decade, you could see the same thing happening here. This belief that it's just one more military strike that's going to take it out, just one more hit is going to get us to peace somehow. And then they're sending in, grossly unqualified people. Jared Kushner and Witkoff did extraordinary work in Israel. They got lucky in a lot of ways because their conditions were set for them to succeed. I don't discount what they achieved, but Iran is an entirely other ballgame. I mean, people who've studied and worked on that country for decades have been unable to make any kind of diplomatic progress. And then they're going to come along somehow and make the peace with people who have no interest in getting to a solution. The longer this goes on, the more humiliating it is for America and the stronger they look. So, we're going to be there in November because there's no other choice. They can't get out of this now.
Yeah, and Angela, I'm wondering if you can take into stock for us whether or not being anti-war, anti-interventionist, America first is even a tenet of MAGA anymore. I mean, we have talked about, as I noted during our last conversation, that there have been MAGA influencers, people like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who have obviously sort of licensed the ability to dissent. but that it hadn't necessarily truly changed people's core beliefs or their core adherence to the president. What is MAGA now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really hard question to answer. I mean, right now it's whatever Trump says, according to Trump, and that's probably true because MAGA doesn't really exist. I mean, it was always, let's keep in mind, it was always sort of this loose coalition built on grievances and grift. And it was a lot of different constituents that sort of just came under this one umbrella. And so, yeah, originally sort of at the center of it, the most diehards, part of the traditional right-wing media, the stuff that Trump pays the closest attention to, the talk radio crowd, the Fox News crowd, they've always been hawkish on Iran. I mean, that has been, a constant through line. And as much as they're America first, but we love war and we want to continue wars and as bellicose as we can possibly be. And there's a lot of magical thinking there. There's the part that I think became much more culturally relevant last cycle where you sort of had these broadcasts and the Maha people who sort of all joined on. They've always been deeply, sort of like a true America first in that they're not interventionist, they're anti-war. Though that constituency has been lit up about this and has been activated nonstop. It's just that Trump is not connected to them in any way. He still watches Fox News and Newsmax. The stuff that he did during the campaign, those were one-offs. He doesn't pay attention to those shows. He's not listening to them. He's not engaging with them. And he's not on Twitter anymore. He doesn't really pay attention to anything happening in the zeitgeist. Truth Social is sort of like a cesspool of just bot nonsense and reflections of Trump's own like AI slop. And so it's really hard for him to get any real sense of what's happening out there. And if you watch Fox News tells you by and large that Trump didn't fail. Anytime there's a bad thing going wrong, somebody else failed Trump, and that the most important thing he can do right now is get rid of Witkoff and Kushner and replace them. That's been the most hard-edged thing that Fox News has said is that it's time to replace the negotiating team. So what is MAGA? MAGA is really sort of a shell. There is a battle happening for what the future of the party is going to be. Vance is probably going to get run over as a part of that if you read the tea leaves. And, the rest of it is the anti-war group is just going to continue spinning, and they're going to have much more to say post-Trump, but not now.
Although I have been told by some White House sources that the president is back on the J.D. Vance bandwagon. But if there's anyone who can give us MAGA's elevator pitch in 1 minute, it is you, Angelo. We do have some breaking news, though. We've been waiting for this, and now we can report that Graham Plattner has officially withdrawn from this Maine Senate race. The Office of Maine Secretary of State said it received Plattner's formal withdrawal, removing him from the ballot following sexual assault allegations that surfaced earlier this week. He had until Monday to get out of the race so that Democrats can pick a replacement. And as of this morning, we had reported that Plattner was going to wait until the bitter end, until Monday, to actually drop out formally and wait until, again, the bitter end. But Tim, what's your reaction to this news? And do you think that Democrats have made a mistake by not rallying around Plattner?
Yeah, I mean, we could do hours on the Graham Plattner drama, and I've done that basically over on the Borg YouTube page. So to sum it up, I don't think that the Democrats have made a mistake. I mean, I think that the accusations against him are very serious. I think if they weren't true, he'd have the opportunity to defend himself vigorously and run a campaign, and he decided not to do that. People can take that fact for what it is. By the way, I think the Republicans were holding a lot of opposition research on Graham Plattner. I've seen some Graham Plattner supporters say this is like convenient timing or whatever. I think it's very inconvenient timing for the Republicans who wanted this deadline to pass before they put out more information about him. I don't know what that would have been. But I think that he was a very risky bet for Democrats in a state they absolutely have to win in all of the big Senate races this year. North Carolina, Iowa, Texas, Ohio, you go through them. Maine is the only one that Democrats won at the presidential level in 16, 20, and 24. Hillary, Joe, Kamala, all won. And so all the Democrats need to do in the Maine Senate race is get all of the Harris, Biden, Clinton voters to vote for whoever the nominee ends up being, So if they can rally around somebody.
हेलो गाइस, नमस्ते सभी दीदी भैया को प्रणाम। देखिए हम सर को पास जा रहे हैं रेलवे स्टेशन पर बुलल और ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा शेयर करिए, कमेंट करिए, लाइक करिए और सर को पीछे हम रहेगा 24 घंटा। देवर साहब।
अच्छा ललिता जी, क्या हुआ था? वीडियो नहीं आ रहा था आपका?
हमको कुछ नहीं, हम नाराज है।
अरे पता चला आपका आईडी हैक हो गया कि?
मतलब देखिए सर जी, कोनो बात हम केकरो भी बोलता है तो खुलम खुला बोलता है, ठीक ना, वीडियो में भी बोलता है। तो गोलकी सो नाराज नहीं है, हमारा से गोलकी नाराज है बढ़िया बात बोलने में। और सर भी बढ़िया बात बोले थे ना, इसलिए गोलकी नाराज है, तो हम भी नाराज है। ओकर आईडी है, ओकर मोबाइल है, ओकर सब कुछ, ओकर दे दशा है बस।
चलिए चलिए बोलिए।
रे छोरी प्रणाम तोरा ढोरी।
हाँ क्या
हाँ बोलिए आप।
बोलिए।
हेलो गाइस, नमस्ते सभी
हाँ।
भैया को प्रणाम। नाम ललिता दीवानी, घर में बीमार है गोलकी रानी,
हाँ।
घर सुमन बहन है। आए थे पोखरी की तरफ वीडियो बनाने के लिए। अच्छा। यह देवर को कह रहे हैं जो हमारा सुमन बहन को प्यार दुलार दीजिए और आगे बढ़ाइए। और ललिता दीवानी गोलकी रानी अभी दूसरा आईडी चढ़ा रहे वीडियो।
चलिए वहाँ बनाते रील्स बनाएंगे।